Hello, everyone. Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm here with my colleague and friend, Siobhan Lattis. She's in charge of our sales engineering and professional services. And I'm Carlos Aragon, and I'm in charge of product marketing for applications. And we're going to take you today on a little journey about how to use AI in the contact center in customer service, but how to do it ethically, how to provide that productivity that AI can bring, but keeping your data private and secure. So I'm going to start by quickly introducing the agenda. These are the topics we're going to be covering today. We're going to do a quick introduction of the state of AI, the challenges in the customer service space, and the attitude that consumers have towards AI, because there's no point in pushing AI if they're not willing to accept it. Then how AI can help on all of those challenges in the AI in the contact center space. The risk when you try and rush AI into the market, what dangers you can find in actual real-life examples of people who messed up a little bit with AI. Then we're going to talk about the importance of setting up an AI governance practice when you deploy AI in your company, and how to have continuous improvement by feeding information back into those AI models. Then we're going to explain to you how to get started by choosing a trusted AI solution, how our AI solutions are being secured, how we ensure that all the data is private and secured in every single stage of the handling. And then finally, give you a couple of hints of what you can ask your contact center vendors when you're talking about AI, what kind of key questions you need to ask them to make sure they're complying with this ethical AI philosophy. And then we're going to show you a quick demo video, right? So I'm going to pass the torch to Siobhan first to take you over our values.
So this is normally the point in the presentation where we'd give you our corporate overview and tell you all about Vonage, our history, our tech, our awards. But given the topic of this presentation, it's really important that we talk about values. These are probably really familiar to lots of you in the room. Your organizations will have similar words, similar statements about how people should be acting. And these have to be more than just words on a slide deck, more than something you see just when HR presents or that you're in front of your employees for performance reviews. These have to be lived behaviors every day to give us this foundation for ethical AI so that we can implement it, use it, and optimize it responsibly and without bias. So these have to be throughout everything that we're doing. When we put AI into place, we need people actually living these values and underpinning everything that we're doing, because the landscape is always changing.
Yeah, and the landscape is always changing, and you're going to see in the graph that we're showing in here a little bit of an example of how that's changing. If you look at how technology has been evolving traditionally, the acceleration of this evolution of technology is just going faster and faster. I mean, back in the days, people just had to worry about, hey, I need to abandon my plow pulled by horses and now move into a tractor. And it took some time for all, the farmers to adopt that technology. Today, by the time a new technology comes out and you're starting to learn it, it's already moved on and there is something else. If you look at the curve in here of how easy humans can adapt versus how fast technology is growing, we've reached a point where technology is growing much faster than we can adapt to it. And that area you're seeing there, that's the pink area over there, we call the area of opportunity, because that's a place where we can actually use other technologies to help us use the existing technology. That's the place where AI can play a significant role in helping us adapt to technology faster. I was actually having a conversation yesterday with the product manager at Salesforce that they say they now have tools that you can talk to AI, and the AI, based on what you tell the AI, is going to build your AI chatbot to help your customers. That's where we're getting on using AI to actually help build stuff that uses the technology. Because at the end of the day, we only have 24 hours and we don't have so much time we can learn, right?
So with all that opportunity available to us and the fact that we need to use AI to help us with AI, what are some of the challenges that AI can help us address as it relates to customer service? So probably no surprise to anybody, 63% of us are frustrated by long wait times to speak to agents. I know the older I get, the more impatient and intolerant I get, whether it's queuing for Starbucks or waiting to speak to somebody in my bank. And then when I get through to someone, it's further compounded by the fact that typically they don't know who I am, I don't feel valued, I might have been asked for a piece of information in the IVR or as part of a pre-chat form, but that's rarely taken into consideration. And we always tend to remember the negative experiences that we have at a much higher rate than the positive experiences. 5 years ago, I ordered a bathroom from a well-known retailer. There was damage to the pieces from transit. I had to get in contact with them. It was very frustrating. I had to talk to them multiple times, explain myself over and over again. I still remember that to this day, 5 years later, and I will tell people about it. If you asked me what positive customer experiences I had in the last 5 years, I can't remember any. I definitely had some, but I can't remember them. So the negative always sticks in our head much more often, and these are the opportunities that we have to address with AI.
That's actually important because that's bias. That's something you're going to have to manage with the AI. We're going to be talking about the bias later. All of this data, by the way, is not something we just pull out of a hat. This comes from our customer engagement report. We do one every year. We run a survey with customers and consumers, and this is the information they gave us. We also took the opportunity to ask them, hey, would you be willing to use AI to help with these issues? And what we found is that, first of all, 80% of the consumers that we surveyed have already been exposed to AI tools. They've talked to some form of chatbot, or they've used some intelligent voice recognition system that uses AI. 60% of them, when we ask them, say they have a positive attitude toward using AI to improve their customer experience. If it serves a purpose, of course, they're willing to adopt it. In fact, when it comes to self-service and virtual agents, 83% of the people we interviewed consider that the virtual agents, when they're used for fast program resolution, are either a must-have or a nice-to-have for a company. So there is already demand from the consumers. They're exposed to AI, and they're willing to take AI. And the thing is, there's a lot of things that AI can help with, right?
Yeah, so if we think about those frustrations we just talked about, how can AI help with those? The long wait times is an obvious one, right? AI-powered virtual assistants. They can help with common requests, and when designed well, can really help us triage before we get through to an agent. So think password resets, a request for a copy of a bill, parcel tracking, changing a booking. Now, when we talk about the AI-powered virtual assistants, I'm sure many of us think about the times where we've had frustrating experience with speech to text. It hasn't understood us. We've been stuck in this endless loop of menus and dead-end options and not being able to drop out to an agent. So actually, that's where AI has come on a long way to help layer on top of this and address those frustrations. So much better natural language recognition, much better analytics for us to understand where customers are kind of hitting these blockers. What are they asking about? So that we haven't just got this static menu of options. We use large language models and generative AI to figure out what they need and serve them in the best way, whether it be just self-service or putting them through to an agent.
But not only that, it's also important to use AI to improve the experience when you have to hand over that customer from that self-service into a human agent. The traditional experience, we've all gone through that. You talk to a chatbot or you talk to a voice IVR, you explain a lot of information about your problem. The IVR collects a lot of data, and when it figures out it cannot help you, it transfers you to an agent, and then you have to repeat everything again to the human. That's completely inefficient. For me, it's super frustrating. So AI can help you also by using that data you provide to the IVR or to the chatbot, going into the CRM, going into Salesforce, pulling out your profile, and then based on the information in your profile, understanding if you've had previous problems, like in the example you used when you had to call several times. I don't want to go to the first level of support. I've already been qualified. I've already have a problem. There is a ticket already open. Just send me to the person that's handling that. AI can do that today. AI can find all that information and then select, oh, Siobhan has been talking to Jimmy. Jimmy has that problem. Let's send that call directly to Jimmy, and Jimmy is going to help her out. So it's very important to have that relationship between your automations, your AI systems, and the repository of data, of course, in a secure and private way, but allowing it to make decisions and not just those automatic answers, but making intelligent decisions for you.
So some other ways that AI can help augment the contact center, noise cancellation, a really simple but effective use of artificial intelligence. So we know how jarring it can be when we're talking to somebody and we can hear a dog barking or children or background office noise. So that's a really, really interesting way to help when you get through to an agent. We've obviously talked about the virtual assistants on the front end. We're at Dreamforce, of course, so you can't ignore the talk about Agentforce. Co-pilots, agent assistants, so when you're actually talking to an agent, how can you use AI to make sure that they are recommending the next best thing, that we're surfacing knowledge articles, that we're giving them the information at their fingertips to empower them. They don't have to put you on hold to go and talk to a supervisor or get approval for the thing that they're going to offer you, a discount or some goodwill. So those are some other ways we can augment. And then, of course, the analytics. So being able to analyze conversations, not just calls, digital conversations as well, and use that to understand what's driving demand, what drives positive sentiment versus negative sentiment, what do we need to feed back into our business to improve our operational processes, to improve our products, to just get on this, kind of path of continuous improvement.
Yeah, at the end of the day, it's just making sure that you can leverage AI in the entire end-to-end chain of the interaction with the customer. From the kind of those transparent AI features that are going to make your voice better, because, for example, noise cancellation, it's useful for the rest of the AI process. If you can clean up that voice, then transcription uses the cleaner voice to produce cleaner results. Natural language understanding has an easier job to understand what you're doing, so the entire experience improves. Now I'm going to focus a little bit on one of those components, which is the self-service aspect, the virtual agents, and just give you a couple of statistics we got out there that prove how even implementing something as simple in your self-service entry point of a virtual agent can help. It basically can provide three main benefits, and there's more, but these are kind of the main ones. The first one is it can help you increase the revenue and to save the cost. And if you see here, this is a data point from Gartner that shows that companies that are using virtual agents can see a potential increase of 10% in their customer lifetime value, which is a very useful KPI in the business space. But they also can save up to 78% on operating costs by transferring to those automations all of those mundane and repetitive tasks and freeing up resources to actually handle more complex and more fulfilling interactions, which also achieves the point of not having your agents bored and looking for another job because they're not fulfilled. The second one is the customer satisfaction. Approximately 40% of consumers prefer self-service for quick things that they can do without needing to have a human. Like, for example, if you're just trying to check if your flight is delayed, do you really want to talk to somebody about that? You just want to go somewhere and say, hey, how is my flight going? And you just get a quick response saying your flight is delayed 30 minutes or your flight is about to go to a gate. Those are the kind of interactions. This data actually comes from Salesforce directly. And then the last one is about efficiency. This one comes from Accenture. And it says that virtual agents can handle up to 80% of routine tasks on an average business. What I mentioned before, allowing the human agents to focus on the complex interactions, the part where they can provide value, where they can provide the empathy, the analytical thinking that people use for those more complex interactions, not just to check your bank account number or if your transfer just went through, right?
So we talked about why to use AI. We talked about how it can augment in the contact center. We talked about all the great benefits, whether it be operational savings, employee and customer experience enhancements, increased lifetime value, or average sales price. So what could possibly go wrong? Well, a lot, as it turns out. There have been some really high-profile recent class action lawsuits against companies who have rushed the implementation of AI and then kind of realize the dangers and the consequences of doing so, right? And a lot of this is around not having a good handle on how customer data is being used in aggregate to train AI models. There's no clear legislation in place right now. There are, of course, data privacy regulations like GDPR and other regulations in other regions. And actually, since we wrote this slide deck, the UK, USA, and EU have entered into the very first international treaty on AI ethics. So I think it remains to be seen how that manifests in legislation and regulations, but I think we can be sure that the old approach of saying this call may be recorded for training and monitoring purposes is probably not going to suffice. And of course, we do that for voice. We really don't do anything on the digital side, right? We interact with businesses using SMS, using WhatsApp, using chat. There's really nothing that tells us how that company is using that data, that transcript. Of course, they are using it, but we're really not proactively informing customers of the use of it and what it is being used for. So I think we can be sure that there's a lot more to follow here. And if we're ahead of the curve, we're not having to respond and be on the back foot when it comes to the legislation and actually how we're proactively informing customers of what we're doing. And then we can avoid some of these dangers that are so high profile for some companies in the media. One of the key takeaways from here, and we're going to see that when we talk later about the question you should ask your vendor, it's the concept of consent, of asking your consumers, hey, we're going to do this with your data. Are you okay with that? And of course, you have to be transparent and explain to them what you're going to be doing with it, what it's going to be stored, and if they're going to have a chance to delete that data. We'll see that later. But just to give you an example of how when you implement a bad experience, things can go wrong. This is not specifically about AI, but I think the example is very illustrative. In 1998, the Bureau for At-Risk Youth in New York decided to launch a campaign to avoid, teenagers getting into drugs.
So what they decided is they were going to create these nice pencils that say "too cool to do drugs" and just spread them around the district schools to every single high school student. They thought it was a great idea. They produced the pencils, delivered the pencils, made a marketing campaign, and then people started using the pencils. And you know what happens when you use a pencil? You have to sharpen it, right? So can you see where this is going? When you start sharpening the pencil, instead of saying "too cool to do drugs," it says "cool to do drugs." And then it says "just do drugs." And then at the very end, it just says "drugs, drugs, drugs." Of course, it was an epic fail. It failed massively. It not only cost the district a lot of money on wasted resources, they had to recall all the pencils, which means additional cost to get them all recalled. Bad publicity, horrible PR situation. That's the same thing that can happen to you with AI if you just rush it and you don't sit down and have people who analyze this and consider what needs to be done. That's what we call AI governance. AI governance is not technology. It's actually building a practice in your company with the right experts, with the right people that are going to look at what you're trying to do with AI and are going to define what's right, what's wrong, what should be implemented, what is acceptable, what's not acceptable, and put all of those processes and practices in place, right?
Yeah, so when we think about the need to balance the benefits that we want to see from AI, the compliance, the security, the pitfalls of bad design, this is a really great way to think about it, right? So we have many inputs into our AI implementation. Whatever it is that we're implementing, whatever use case we're trying to solve for, there's various inputs. So the first one is your vendor that you choose and your system integrator should be giving you best practice. They themselves should have AI governance frameworks and have some really good, robust ideas about what to do and what not to do, and highlight to you where you could be introducing biases or data privacy concerns. So that needs to be taken into consideration. The second one, of course, is your own internal governance policies and guardrails. And actually, if you don't have them, that really does need to be a prerequisite before you implement any kind of AI technology. Technology capabilities, what is the thing that you're trying to implement? What can it do? What can't it do? Are there any gaps that you are then going to see manifest in some of these areas around kind of poor design or governance risks? And then, of course, what's your desired benefit? I'm a big believer in balancing quantity and quality. So you might want to drive efficiency, but is efficiency always the right approach if it's not balanced with effectiveness? If we can, put 80% of our interactions through a self-service bot, great, we've been really efficient. But actually, have we thought about the impact on perhaps the demographics of our customers, vulnerable people? Can we make sure that those drop out and opt out and get through to a person rather than being treated inappropriately by a voice bot, for example? So there's all these inputs into your AI implementation. You implement it. Great, you're done. Well, no, you always need to review and refine. And so review really is about keeping up with those regulations and governance, both from an internal and an external perspective. Internal is really important. I've seen companies implement AI, perhaps with leaders in the organization who have, a good, healthy appetite towards risk. And then maybe those leaders move on, new ones come in. All of a sudden, we've got different points of view, different appetites for risk and reward. So that's always changing, and that's going to play into reviewing the implementation that you have. And then, of course, refining and optimizing comes from your KPIs and the actual feedback that you get from customers and employees. So if you're measuring the effectiveness of AI and you decide you need to do something differently, how does that affect your customers and your employees? And that's really why we've got this underpinning foundational element here around focus on employee skills. The technology isn't enough without the people. And so you need people to be really well versed in unconscious bias, integrity, knowledge of the AI principles, and psychological safety. You want your agents to be able to speak up when it feels like the technology is going wrong. A really good example would be using an AI assistant to help salespeople go through tying people into contracts. If that's being used, again, with vulnerable people, perhaps, that's not the right application of it. It always makes me think about a well-known hyperscaler who created some hiring software to help them process resumes and applications more quickly. Luckily, they had people who spoke up before they rolled it out because it was actually approving white male applicants at a much higher rate than anybody else. So they actually scrapped it because they just could not figure out how to code that bias out of the application. If they hadn't have had this foundation of psychological safety and people with an understanding of bias, they probably would have ruled that out and then felt the backlash and the repercussions. So the employee skills are not to be underestimated.
Yeah, and for that, I've been recommending to some of the people I've been talking to yesterday and today that Salesforce does actually have a very nice white paper about AI ethics. They published about 1.5 years ago. We work with Salesforce a lot. We're very aligned with their practices. And 5 of those key practices of how to choose a trusted AI solution are the ones we abide by. That's why we say here that you should start by choosing a trusted AI solution. Those 5 principles are responsibility. You need to make sure that you have an AI solution that is focused on protecting human rights, on protecting the data you're entrusting to that system, and ensuring that all that information is being kept secure, confidential, when it's stored and when it's transferred between systems. The second one is being accountable. It's related to what you mentioned before of having that way that you can not only provide a feedback loop of modifying the behavior of our AI with new rules, new regulations, but also be able to have some traceability of what the AI is doing to make sure you can keep it accountable. The third one is transparent. And that's very important because a lot of people build these large language models. They just take some code, start feeding information, but they don't have mechanisms to know what the AI is actually doing. If I'm going to ask the AI about something, what's actually going to happen? What's going to be the process? Which feeds of data it's going to use to produce it? You need to make sure that you have a clarity of how the process works, where failures or gaps could happen, and also make sure that when you do that solution is also transparent for the end user, that it's going to be driving them through the use of the technology. The fourth one is empowering. You want an AI that's not there, and I always use the example when we talk in the contact center space. The first question we always get is, so is this going to allow me to save heads? And well, technically, yes, every technology can be used for good or for evil. Can you cut the cost? Yes. Would I recommend you cut the cost? Probably not, because the thing is, this is an opportunity for you to focus your people to doing something more valuable to improve your customer experience. If you just focus on cutting the cost and you take the humans out of the equation, what you're going to get is probably a lower quality of experience for your consumers. And then the other part of this is if a company starts getting the reputation that they're using AI just to get rid of people or to be able to outsource people into much cheaper places, they're going to get a bad reputation and consumers will start to act against it. And the last one is what you mentioned before about the bias, is making sure the AI is inclusive, making sure you also have the mechanisms to respect the values of society, to enforce inclusion, to enforce equality, to make sure that you're not making decisions based on bias because of the content you're feeding it. You probably guys heard about when the first AI-generated images came about a couple of years ago. There was a huge scandal because when you ask the AI model for certain professions that were supposed to be high pay, the pictures you would always get were white males. And when you ask for certain professions that were, lower level, you always got Latinos or African Americans or Asian or other people. So there was a lot of stereotyping, and that needs to be controlled and eliminated from the system.
So what should you be asking your contact center vendor, or actually any vendor that you're using for any kind of AI solution? The first thing is, how do they handle hallucinations? We all hear about the really funny hallucinations that things like ChatGPT does. When you ask it how many R's there are in strawberry, it thinks there are 2, when in fact there are 3. So how do they handle that? How is the AI vendor going to help you understand the accuracy of the predictions? Are they to be trusted? Is there an element of, kind of risk mitigation there? So how do they handle hallucinations, and how do they present that to you so that you can use the predictions and the answers with eyes wide open? The second one is explainability. So to Carlos's point, is there an end-to-end view of how the answers and the predictions came about? What feeds were used? What data was used? What processes were used? What algorithms were used? Can you accurately go back all the way to the beginning and figure out and explain how the AI did what it did? Privacy of training data. So back to the lawsuits we talked about, is the vendor using that data to train their AI model in aggregate, or are they keeping it private and training their model in a different way? And if they're using third parties themselves, how are they keeping your data secure when using those third parties? Do they have the appropriate technology controls and also agreements in place with those third-party vendors to ensure that your data is secure and, again, isn't being used by that third party to train their models, to improve their processes, and actually exposing your customers' data to however many people down the chain.
Yeah, and the other 4 questions that you should ask is, first of all, what do they do with the data? How do they collect the data? Where do they store it? How well is it protected? For how long is it retained? And if the customer, for some reason, wants their data to be scrapped, can they do that? How do they do that? The other one, we talked about this before, consent and transparency. How are you asking your customers to provide consent to the use you're going to be doing with the data on the AI systems? Are they going to be informed how the data will be used? Are they going to be informed if it's going to be shared with third parties? Because even if there is no regulation today that defines how AI is to be used, there is regulation about data privacy, and all of those things still apply when you're using AI, which drives us to compliance and regulations. Does the vendor address the relevant regulations? Today, it's GDPR, is the California Consumer Protection Act that kind of rules what you can do with customer data. But pretty soon, there's going to be US, UK, and European rules about ethical use of AI. And there's going to be many more. You may even get local laws that you're going to have to be able to inject into the system. And that's the kind of the follow-up question is, how is the vendor going to ensure that their system continues to provide compliance? Not just, oh, we're compliant with this today. Okay, what about tomorrow? How are you going to handle that? Because if I'm going to buy your system and I'm going to use it for 5 years, I want to make sure I can adapt. And then the last one is the ethical considerations. When we talk about the bias, when we talk about how you're going to be handling those errors that you find, what are going to be the mechanisms there to address those ethical concerns? Are you going to be able to talk to somebody? Do you have a committee that they can talk to bring those alerts, and then have a team that takes care of purging those biases or those problems from the system?
So then how specifically is Vonage secure? So we have our responsible AI committee. We talked a little bit about this earlier, right? Having people with the right skills and accountability to speak up and to raise when they have concerns about how we are building our AI technology, how we are implementing our AI technology. It's really important for us that that's a diverse group of people. We don't want everybody in the room just going, yes, yes, we agree. So it has to be a good representation across our organization and people that help to keep us accountable and challenge us on the ideas that we're coming up with and the products that we're developing. Data privacy, obviously, there's lots of compliance and regulations and certifications that we do have, which we'll talk about in a moment. And then how do we actually architect our solutions end to end? We want to minimize as much as possible exposure to public cloud. So our first port of call is to look at private cloud. If we have to go public cloud, is that the right thing to do? We will make trade-offs in terms of experience and functionality. To make sure that we are secure. Because as we talked about earlier, the efficiency isn't always worth the trade-off in effectiveness and compliance. So really end-to-end, we're looking at trying to minimize the identifiable exposure as much as possible across the life cycle of our products.
And on the right-hand side here, you can see some testimonials of how we make this happen. So first of all, we are compliant with the global regulations like GDPR or CCPA. But also vertical focus regulations like HIPAA in the healthcare space, which defines what you can do, not just with the personal information, but with a very specific kind of personal information, which is your medical records. Or PCI, for example, of how you're supposed to secure your credit card transactions to make sure that your agents don't have access to the credit card numbers and the financial information. The other ways that we implement this is by minimizing the data we hold in our own platforms, making sure if you're using a CRM like Salesforce, all of the relevant data is stored in one single place so that we can not only ensure that security there, but the more systems you have, the more risk there is that one can get exploited, or whenever you have to change something, you're going to have to go to multiple systems. There is a possibility of human error because you missed something. Then we also do an integration with the Salesforce deterministic encryption, and we encrypt the data at rest and in transit. Basically, we make sure that even if there is a place where data can be intercepted, it's not going to be able to be translated so that you can understand what it is. We provide also strict access controls, not just physical access to our systems. Of course, not everybody in Vonage can access our services in the cloud. There is a very strict regulation of who can do what, but also even in our customers' installations, there is different levels of administration. Obviously, an agent cannot see the same thing an admin can see, the same thing a supervisor can see. There is different tiers, and everybody just gets access to the information they're allowed to see. And then finally, one thing that we do very, very strictly is ensure that the third parties that we use are not using the customer data to train their AI. That was one of the issues with a lot of the class action lawsuits, that they didn't have any mechanisms in place, and then they realized their vendors were actually training their AI system using the customer data. We do use information to train our AI systems, but we scrub information from there so that there is no personally identifiable information, and we just feed that information kind of, not manually, but you get my point. We intentionally fed that information to our system to train it, and then the rest of the customer information that is being used during the interactions is never stored. The system dumps it out after the interaction is complete. So those are the ways that we're implementing security in our AI. Of course, we're evolving. We have our own committee that evaluates all of these things, and our intention is to keep complying with regulations and ensuring that the AI that we produce is ethical, it's effective, and it's driving not just Vonage, but everybody forward, correct? So said this, we're gonna do a quick demo. Can you explain us what that's gonna be about?
Yep, so it's only about 2 minutes long. So we're gonna see a call coming through. We're gonna greet the caller with a virtual assistant who's gonna gather information up front. We're also gonna see some voice biometrics. So really a great application of AI to identify customers securely before we let them go through to somebody in the contact center. We're gonna have the call go through to the agent, and then we're gonna see some of these agent assist tools like next best action, real-time transcription, and call summarization come to life. So it's only about 2 minutes long, little teaser for you. If you would like a more in-depth demo, we have all of our demo stations over here on this side.
All right, so let's hit the button and see if it magically happens.
I think if you press again, oh no.
Yep.
Hi.
There we go.
Thanks for calling Best Bank. Let's authenticate you with your voice. Repeat the passphrase. Please authenticate me with my voice after the beep.
Please authenticate me with my voice.
Thank you. You have been authenticated using your voice. Please wait while we connect you. You are now talking to V, a virtual assistant, and I am here to help. What is the reason for your call today?
I have an issue with my online account. I can't seem to log in.
Please can you provide any further information to help us manage your call more effectively?
Oh, yeah, okay. I get an error message about an unsuccessful migration.
Thank you. I shall now route you to a member of our account team.
Good afternoon, Mr. Stevens. Welcome to Best Bank. My name is Isaac. I can see that you've already passed our security check. I noticed that you're calling about an issue with your account. Is that correct?
Yes, I can't seem to log in and I get this weird error message.
Okay. Yeah, I can see what the issue is actually, and I can fix this for you now.
Great, thanks.
That was basically it. Now, the funny thing is when you look at it, it's well, it's not that much. Well, that's the magic. When AI works fine, it's really not that much. You don't really see anything magical happen. It just, things just flow quickly and the interaction gets completed easily. What you saw in the last part in there is that once it gets transferred to the agent is given all the information they need to help the customer, some of the things that the AI system triage in the virtual agent, and then AI is assisting them live during the interaction, pushing them next best actions, knowledge-based information on how to solve that problem, which was due to a failed migration. They get the problem solved, and the customer is now happy. So, of course, there's going to be more stuff you are going to be able to see in the demos that our team is providing there. This is just a little bit to keep you hungry and want to see more. But that's about our session for today. So if you'd like to ask any questions, there are microphones in the room to ask questions. And I'd like to recommend you to scan the QR code to download the Vonage Global Customer Engagement. Lots of insights in there about AI, about customer experience. And also there is a blog we published in August talking about AI in the contact center, how to enhance the experiences while ensuring data privacy. You can scan those QR codes and get those directly on your mobile phone. So if anybody has any questions, come on. Well, while people think about the questions, one question I did have is when it comes to putting that kind of governance, what do you think would be recommendations of how you would have to make that team? Would it have to be like just technical people, or which people would you put in that team?
So I think it should really be a cross-section of the organization. And it's funny, actually, we have a big focus at Vonage on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so we're putting together cross-functional forums for almost every area of our business, right? Whether it be marketing and us reviewing the content that they're putting out to make sure it's diverse, whether it be reviewing our products to make sure that they are representative and not biased. I think actually that cross-functional forum of people at all levels of the organization in lots of different areas of the organization is crucial, because you want that diversity of thought. You want people who think differently. You want people to play devil's advocate and be comfortable saying, I'm not quite sure about that. What could go wrong? Should we do it a bit differently? And it's fine. Everybody can professionally agree and disagree and then come up with a consensus and move on. I think it's a really good practice to have that healthy debate in organizations, rather than having all the yes people going, yep, we're good, let's move on to the next thing.
So in layman's terms, don't just put the technical geeks in that committee.
No.
You want the full spectrum of people from different areas of the business, representing maybe even customer service, customer retention, marketing. One that you didn't mention that I think is going to be important, legal.
Yes,
You're going to need people from legal to make sure that what you're doing there complies with regulations. They can provide an assessment of the risk that the company could be incurring and give you instructions on what things you should be protecting the company from. So that's super important. Even people in PR.
Yep.
Because if the AI goes wrong, you got a PR crisis in your hands very quickly. So, yeah. All right, come on, guys. Is everybody sleeping today? I can't believe you don't have a question in the morning.
They're all noodling on what we've told.
Yeah, I think we need to give them more sugar so that they get more hyperactive and they start asking questions. Okay.
About chasing regulations and making sure that you stay in compliance. You mentioned about the global compliance that's going to be coming down the line. You mentioned about the things that lawsuits are being placed on today. What is Vonage's approach on how to stay ahead of that and to ensure that that we're doing more than just staying in compliance?
Yeah, I'll have a go first. I think it's about our external focus, right? I think companies that kind of just stay really inwardly focused on their own products and their own challenges and their own goals, they're going to miss this stuff, right? Like, you have to be outward focused. I think Ericsson, our parent company, is a really great example of having inroads into governments, into local policymakers, understanding what's coming down the line before it even comes down the line. There are so many different forums, different connections that you can make, different ways that you can stay ahead of what's coming. And you have to have that external focus, because actually that's where your results as a business happen. It's not internally when you sell things or you serve customers. It's the external focus that really makes a difference.
And then there is the multi-level approach. I mean, staying up to those regulations is not just about the technical implementation of how we do things. It's about, as we mentioned, for example, with consent. If the AI regulations now say that before you can use a bot to use the customer information, you have to inform the customer, we're going to have to implement in our systems a prompt somehow, whether it's voice or text, that in every single interaction, it tells you, we're going to be using AI for this. This is what's going to happen with your information. Here's a link to a policy if you want to read more. If you want to continue, say yes. If you don't want to continue, say no, and then we'll transfer you to maybe an agent that's not going to get AI, and we're going to give you that option to just go the traditional way. But give the customers the way to do that. You have to implement that in all of your processes, not just in the technology. Or other things, for example, when it comes to bias, maybe that aspect is about having the committee that's training that AI, that large language model, to decide, evaluate the data that's going to be used for the training, have an analysis of it, and say, okay, this one we're not going to use because it's too biased, and we're going to add like a little bit more to the mix so that the AI gets like the right percentage, let's say, of different profiles so that there is no risk for stereotyping. I wish I had a simple answer, but it's actually quite complex. But that's the thing, is the people who are not asking those questions, the people who are kind of saying AI is not that complicated, from a technical point of view, it might not be. From the social, legal, and kind of procedural point of view, it is. And it's not impossible, but you're going to have to put all those processes in place.
Yeah, I think the one thing we can be sure of is that regulations are getting stricter. Like, they're not going to get less strict, constantly stricter. So if you can think about future proofing and try and think a few steps ahead, what could happen, and have some kind of really good external resources to help inform that, then you'll be successful.
There's another trick that doesn't just work for Vonage, it works for everybody else. Normally, regulation is not leading, it's following. So look at what your competitors are doing, look how they're failing, look at their PR crises, their lawsuits they're getting, and expect regulation is going to try and plug that hole later. So be prepared so that it doesn't happen to you. We have a question over there.
Yeah, I'm interested, and sorry, I missed the beginning if you addressed this already, but what is the public's sort of expectation of this? Because I know when I call a bank or whatever and they say, this is an automated agent, I'm here to help you, I cringe because I just want to talk to somebody who's going to give me an answer. And I basically give the AI or whatever one shot at answering my question correctly, and then I'm not going to waste another minute with it. But what can you say about what the public expectation is, or receptivity, if that's a word?
Yeah, so we did address that. I recommend you scan the QR code of our customer engagement report because you're going to find a lot of insights in there. But basically, we ask consumers about their acceptance of AI. About 80% of them say that they have already been exposed to AI. About 2/3 of them said that they are actually accepting AI for things like quick resolutions. And almost 3/4 of them were saying that they consider having virtual agents for self-service for, like, again, quick, easy to solve issues are either must-haves or nice-to-haves for businesses. So the public is changing their perception, their acceptance of AI already. I agree with you. It really depends on the experience, because I've had good AI experiences and bad AI experiences. I've had bad chatbots that maybe they weren't even AI. Well, they use some form of AI for intelligent voice recognition. But then when they do understand what you want, their internal process to give you an answer, it's broken, and it doesn't really get you any help. Or basically, it will understand your sentence, but it just latches on certain keywords and then give you options that they really don't apply. In some cases, they have a good way to quickly escalate into a human agent. In some cases, when that escalation happens, the information is pulled and presented to the agent. In many cases, it's not, and you have to repeat it again, which makes it very frustrating. That's kind of my pet peeve there. Every time I have to repeat again what I just said, I mean, in 2010, I would accept it. In 2024, heck no. I mean, come on. But I get your point. On the bright side, AI is getting better and better. The implementations are getting better. We're going to see a lot of people no longer kind of building AI in-house, but choosing a vendor to implement kind of proven and properly trained models like Vonage is offering to our customers. But overall, going back to your question, yes, the public is changing their acceptance of AI. But the key there is 4 quick resolution items. So things like we mentioned it before, checking if your flight is delayed, or checking if your luggage is arriving, or checking if your delivery is coming, things like that, or checking if a transfer happened in your bank, or you received your paycheck, whatever it is. Things that are more complex, unless the machines get super smart at handling it, I think people are still going to want to talk to a person. And actually, we continue to see that. When the whole thing about digital channels came a few years ago, everybody was like, oh, voice is dead. No, voice is more alive than ever. Because at the end of the day, when you reach a point that you need a problem to be resolved and it's complex enough, you'd rather talk to a person than have to type everything on a keyboard. So being able to provide that kind of mix of all of those channels, all of those capabilities, that's going to be the magic sauce when you deliver customer service to your customer. Give them the option of how they want to be helped.
And I think we all have an opportunity to control how that perception evolves, right? When we think about the AI assistants, the co-pilots, the things that are helping our agents serve the customer when they're actually talking to them or interacting with them, I think how we train our employees to take those inputs but apply their own common sense, that's going to be crucial, right? If you're talking to somebody and you're sat there going, I feel like they're just blindly following instructions from some arbitrary thing on the side, of course we're then going to go, well, this AI stuff's not great. This isn't a great experience for me. So we need people who are empowered to take those inputs, to understand them and interpret them and use them sensibly. Otherwise, yeah, we're just going to kind of continue this degradation of people's perceptions of AI versus actually, oh, I love it, it's making it easier for me to get a resolution to the thing that I am looking for.
Then going back to the topic of bias, but this one, we are actually, all of us are biased towards AI because we've only seen some sides of AI, or definitely what you say, the bad experiences stick.
Yeah.
And we're biased there. But the other issue is that there is a lot of awareness now on generative AI because of ChatGPT, because of DALL-E, because of all those image generators. But there is many other aspects of AI, conversational AI, language processing AI, natural language understanding, natural language processing, voice transcription, noise cancellation, voice improvement. And then there is the part about predictive AI. And if you saw, I mean, what you saw in the demo, it shows that there are places where you're getting, a direct interaction with the AI, you're asking it questions or it's answering to you, but there are other places where the AI is just sitting on the sidelines, just being a little fly on the wall, and then based on what you're talking about, it's popping up a next best action, or it's basically predicting what needs to happen next to assist either the agent or the consumer on what's kind of the proper course of action to continue. Like, for example, the AI detected that we needed to authenticate the user and it sent it to the voice biometrics because the transaction that this person wanted to do maybe required authentication. Those kind of elements of AI are going to be in every single step of the journey for the customer.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Sure.
So then in that case, then how do you, thinking about customer experience, what are some metrics I really should be looking at to understand whether the AI is actually successful? Because if it's transactional kind of stuff and it's really simple, like resetting your password or checking your balance on your account, or when a flight's late, I can do that on a website or through an app on my phone and I can get a quick answer and that's satisfying. And AI is a big investment, right? You keep talking about all the people that are going to be involved and all the cost and the research that goes into it, and even the time we're spending now talking about it. But how will I know that this investment that I've put into AI and making it work for our customers is actually to their benefit or that they love it? I know you can ask a survey, but is there any other way of understanding the success?
So specifically how a certain AI implementation is going to help you, it's going to depend on what's your objective when you implement that. So for example, if your objective is to transfer a lot of the calls that you're getting in your contact center to the automation for simple things like changing a password or checking a delivery, then your metric is going to be there is how many calls you're deflecting to the AI and how much cost you're saving. If you're trying to look at the customer experience, what you want to do is, if you want to see if the AI is actually working, you're going to be using similar metrics. You're going to be looking at customer lifetime value. You're going to be looking at CSAT scores, Net Promoter scores. Same thing as when you had human agents. Are you getting the same scores with people that are exclusively using the AI for those activities? Are they getting better? Are they getting worse? That's how you can kind of tweak. The other thing that I wanted to mention is you talked about, hey, there are things that, yes, they can talk to the bot, but they can also do it on the website or they can do it on the app. That's right. But the thing is, for many, conversation is still the better way to go. And it's faster if you have a place, a quick agent you can go to. And by the way, we're still thinking about chatbots on a website, but that thing is changing. Outside of the US, everybody is using WhatsApp today to ask questions to businesses. And you cannot have humans manning all of that. They're using chatbots for that. Here in the US, I'm still a firm believer that RCS at some point is going to take off. iOS 18 was released yesterday, and now it brings iOS to the iPhone. Now every single smartphone in North America has RCS services. That's the evolution of SMS. Rich multimedia messaging on your phone provided by your carrier. It's actually Google, but provided by your carrier with certain practices when you do business messaging on it to make sure that the brand has been vetted. If you see a logo, you know it's the right brand. It's not somebody impersonating the brand. It's much easier as a consumer to have my RCS, my messaging client on the phone, just open it up, look for a brand, and start talking to the brand and ask questions. If they know my phone number, and if they start pairing with some other capabilities that Vonage provides, like network APIs, where you can do silent authentication based on your SIM card, where you can check security with has the SIM been swapped recently? Not on the phone, but has somebody created a duplicate of the SIM? In that case, we may have a fraud because somebody just got a copy for somebody. All of those mechanisms can allow you to just, based on the phone, just say, oh, we know it's you. Here's your information. What can you help you with? And you don't have to install several applications on the phone, because that's another metric that happened a few years ago. In practice, most of us, we have hundreds of apps on our phones, But if you look at the ones you use every day, it's typically 5, and they're always from the same actors. It's either your Gmail or your Outlook, depending on which side of the fence you're on. It's either your Facebook or your Instagram or your TikTok or your Snapchat, one social network you use mostly, and then one messenger client, whether it's Facebook messaging or it's WhatsApp or it's whatever, depending on the region that is. So at the end of the day, asking for a consumer to deploy an application, the cost of deploying and maintaining the application and then having the users engage it, unless it's a company that you do a lot of business with, all of us have our banking app in there because that's your bank. But if I'm just going to buy a trip with an airline that I normally don't use, am I going to install the app? Maybe for a while and then I delete it. But would I prefer to just go and open a conversation with the brand on a messaging client and ask them the questions and handle that there? I might, because it's much easier for me. So again, there are issues today, but I think the way that people interact with the technology, that goes back to that core, it's going to be continuously changing. As companies, what we have to offer them is the choice. Because at the end of the day, the problem is if your competitors are giving them the choice and they start steering towards talking to AI for certain things and you don't have it, you're going to be left behind. I mean, it's not simple. You have to take the risk and do those investments for sure. But we have proof of concepts. We can let you try before you buy. All right, any other questions? We have a question over here.
I was wondering, what the report was does it take into accountability age and demographic or how they see AI usage at this time? Was any
On the customer engagement?
On the customer engagement report, we might have that information. I don't know if we put it in the report, but when we collected the answers, it's in there. If you're interested, we may talk to our content team, see if we can dig it out.
Yes, sir, because
Yeah.
that type of information will also help me with saying, okay, if my client base is usually older ones that are calling in for a service, what type of items do I want to do with that AI versus if it's a young group, I can maybe more receptive to other items.
What I was going to say, scan the QR code, look at the report, because it's like several pages long. It may have that information already in there. I don't know it out of the top of my head, but if it's not, we may be able to find some details. But my hunch here, based on the market that I've analyzed, the older you get, the most likely they're going to want to interact with voice, not necessarily with a human, but they want to make sure that whatever's in the other end of the conversation can understand their question normally. So they hate having to go through options 1, 2, 3, and 4. They'd like to ask a question and then something happens. But it's probably going to have to be voice, not much texting or chatting. Which again, you can apply AI to voice. Any more questions? Well, if there are no more questions, we're actually 7 minutes over time. So we're going to call it quits. Thank you very much for your participation. Thank you very much for being my partner in crime.
Thank you, Carlos.
And we'll see you next. Thank you, everyone.